Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the only weekly news show you need to keep up with what's really going on in the world. I'm Kevin Barrett with Helen Bienisky. Hey, welcome back, Helen. Good to have you.
Good to be here. Hi, Kevin.
Okay, well, we've got the deal of the century for you folks, and it's not the one that the cigar-waving mobster in the White House has for the Palestinians, which is basically extermination. No, we're not going to exterminate our viewers. We're going to illuminate our viewers. We're going to bring information to our viewers. And so, hey, that's quite a deal. The alternative media is really the deal of the century. This is the century where, until they completely succeed in silencing and deplatforming us, we are going to keep on telling the truth, and you're going to know what's actually going on in a way that people in other times and places never could. So that is the true deal of the century. If you can't handle the truth, don't watch False Flag Weekly News. Enough of that. And let's go to that slide for our. Oh yeah, don't forget to join our mailing list so we can keep you informed. Next time we get deplatformed, we'll move to a different platform, and you'll know exactly where it is. Okay, so yeah, deal of the century here. The Palestinians are not getting much of a deal, but our viewers are. So please support False Flag Weekly News. Helen, can you believe these scumbags telling the Palestinians, surrender, Dorothy, give us everything, and if you don't, this is the last chance you'll ever have. Man, it just, my blood pressure skyrocketed watching this. I had to actually listen to the live feed while I was on Press TV, and I almost had a heart attack. What do you think, Helen?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to it too, and I was getting physically nauseous because it's like, it's going to be bad. Anything that comes out of Jared Kushner's warped little mind when he's literally sitting there saying, oh yeah, I was thinking of negotiating with them, but they're so stupid, and like literally using words like stupid and like irrational. And so, whatever comes out is not going to be good, but actually hearing him describe it and in his like showman's huckster voice, it was really just nauseating, like physically uncomfortable to listen to. Like it basically said, okay, so all the illegal stuff, all the land grabs, all of the like cutting you off from your natural resources and everything that we've done in the last half century, we're going to legitimize all that, make it legal, and do a few more shenanigans, give you a couple patches of worthless land in the desert, and you're going to say thank you, and you're going to sit down, shut up, and turn over your guns, as if you have any guns to speak of anyway. So it's adding insult to injury is what it is. And I'm not surprised that the Palestinians were a little upset.
And of course, it was a big political stunt for Trump, who has the impeachment inquiry going. He has these rape accusations, DNA tests to see if we can bust him for rape. We'll get into that later. Bibi Netanyahu is one step ahead of prison himself. So when the two of them get together with second-generation mobster Jared Kushner, whose father went to federal prison for one of the most disgusting crimes the attorney general had ever seen, and these are the guys giving us our deal. We know that it's basically a bunch of criminals who are just one step ahead of prison, trying to stay out of prison. And so let's move to the impeachment issue, which, of course, was bearing down on Trump as he staged his deal of the century PR stunt. So John Bolton has a book supposedly coming out that supposedly nails Trump for the so-called quid pro quo. And now the White House is threatening him, saying that this book could reasonably be expected to cause exceptionally grave harm to the national security. Well, I think Bolton himself could reasonably be expected to cause grave harm to national security if he got anywhere near any decision-making positions, and Trump gave him one. So
yeah, he already has.
Of course, Trump himself could be reasonably expected too. So they're all dangerous to everybody's security. But whether Bolton's revelations will see the light of day or whether the Senate will vote to acquit as early as today, possibly, remains to be seen. Let's get through this impeachment circus fast, Helen, because it's really, it's basically just bread and circuses. I wrote a bit of a little satire here on, well, can you believe this? Alan Dershowitz, the slimiest lawyer in U.S. history, the guy who's defended more obviously guilty clients than anybody in history. Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer, who flew around on the Lolita Express and got massages from child prostitutes in Epstein's mansion, he's the guy that Trump picked to defend him in the Senate. So, you can't really top that, even if you're a satire writer, but I tried. And so here we are. If the underwear doesn't fit, you must acquit. And any senators who vote to acquit Trump will get a complimentary 5,000 frequent flyer miles on the Lolita Express, and so on and so forth. I mean, what can you say?
I liked how Claire McCaskill was actually calling him in the hearing Mr. Underwear and Mr. Underwear. She kept doing that. And then I hear today that he's resigned. He's not part of the legal team anymore. And I'm wondering, did that have something to do with it? Because I had literally just said, like, maybe an hour before that Mr. Underwear started trending on Twitter, I thought, how come that Alan Dershowitz can go out in public and be on TV and go to court and all this stuff without people just throwing rotten vegetables at him? Because, like, if Harvey Weinstein or somebody tried to do that with all these people saying that he's sexually assaulted them and all this, he would be excoriated. He'd be dragged through the mud. But Dershowitz, no, Dershowitz has a force field around him. We know what that force field is made out of, but we're not going to talk about it because we're on YouTube. Yep. But and the other thing about John Bolton is that, yes, he already has done significant harm to national security. I mean, if it wasn't for him, we might have peace with North Korea. We might even have peace with Afghanistan, although that's unlikely because there are enough other people in the Trump administration that wouldn't let that happen. But it's just interesting to watch, like, these hugely repulsive people going against other hugely repulsive people and both just tearing at each other. And it's like, no matter who wins, they're going to be a scumbag. Whoever loses is going to be a scumbag. But Bolton, I think, is probably the apex scumbag in the Bolton-Trump match, just because he's, like, watching the so-called left, what passes for liberals these days, rush to worship at his feet because, oh, he can do damage to Trump. It's like they would pull up any of history's monsters, pull up Genghis Khan, and they'd be cuddling up to Genghis Khan saying, Genghis, can you get Trump out of office, please? And he'd cut off their heads and rape the stump, and it would be, and the other ones would line up to have that done to them too, because Trump.
Yeah, the pathetic media, the pathetic Democrats, there's really no opposition. It's all a big show. I guess Trump had to hire Dershowitz because Dershowitz had the perfect defense for Trump, the underwear defense. Trump indubitably kept his underwear on while shaking down Zelensky. Let's move on. Speaking of keeping his underwear on, how about Trump's undergarments covered with DNA evidence of a rape that he allegedly committed? And this looks like another credible rape accusation against Trump.
No, this is the same one from before, and she's just milking and milking and milking. This woman is so full of shit. I mean, pardon my language, but this woman is 100% full of shit. She came out with a rape fantasy that was exactly like this rape that she claims that Trump committed of her in the dressing room. Unless this is another rape, which I don't think it is. I mean, I just skimmed that story, but she's making things up, which, I mean, it's possible that Trump
test the DNA then and find out, right?
Test the DNA, but it's like she's been stashing this dress for 20 years, and
sounds like Monica Lewinsky, doesn't it?
This is complete. I mean, you have to be really, really either so blinded with your hatred for Trump that, like, your common sense has completely evaporated, or just not be very smart. And I think that people are just, Trump derangement syndrome has eaten away people's brains like some form of mad cow disease, to the point where this woman is seen as credible when there's nothing, credibility and her do not live in the same zip code.
Well, but there's just about as long a line of women accusing Trump of this kind of thing as there is of women accusing Clinton of this kind of thing. I mean, I think Trump and Clinton are both two peas in a pod. They're both psychopaths, and they probably did do this stuff. And this particular woman, test the DNA, but I wouldn't be surprised if she wins the DNA test and it turns out she's telling the truth.
No, she's ruining the credibility of any other woman who might actually have a reasonable claim against Trump, because, I mean...
You think could she be a false flag? Like, what if Trump is setting her up?
Actually, yeah, no, that's true. She could be. Like I said, she hurts the credibility of any other accuser who might have a legitimate claim. There's no way this woman stashed a dress for 25 years or however long. On the off chance that Trump might be president, she might have to, come to the rescue of the resistance to try to get him. This is so unbelievable. I mean,
yeah, I guess it sounds a little improbable, but test the DNA, right? I mean, just like with all those improbable stories about UFOs. If you watch the Disclosure Project videos and you see dozens and dozens of former high-level classified military people saying, hey, we saw the alien bodies. We saw, every day we saw these things flying by at near light speed, this kind on our radars, this kind of stuff. Well, and they're begging to testify before Congress. Sure, it sounds improbable, but take them before Congress, put them under oath. That's what they're asking for. They want to testify under oath before Congress. And even if it sounds improbable, obviously you want to test them. And so I would just keep an open mind on this and other.
It's also possible that it's not like it's particularly difficult to get the swab of Trump's DNA, wipe it on a dress, and say, haha, gotcha, I did stash that dress for 25 years after all, despite having no reason to.
Wait a minute, how did she get Trump's DNA?
Because do you have any idea how many people in the White House or in the Trump's immediate vicinity want to get rid of him? Like that's not a very difficult thing to do. All they need to do is take a napkin. I mean,
he probably drools. He probably drools in his soda. I mean, he eats chips and drinks soda all day, so he's undoubtedly drooling all over the place. And so I guess you're right. Anyway, let's move on to Trump and Bibi and their insane deal. We mentioned this earlier, but let's go over the slides here. This happened right at the moment that Netanyahu was indicted. He was indicted just a few hours before they wheel him in front of the cameras with Trump. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. He's been charged with bribery and fraud in 3 separate corruption cases. And of course, he says it's an attempted coup driven by the left and the media, just like what Trump is saying. Really interesting. I mean, we've got 2 gangsters calling out attempted coups, and maybe they are attempted coups because the adults in the national security state in both countries are saying these 2 psychopathic gangsters have no business running for dog catcher, much less running a country.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you have a child who's never been told no growing up, and they just want more and more and more, and then they get more and they want more, and they're completely psychotic because no one's ever put limits on them. I mean, Netanyahu, if he is not stopped, I mean, one of the reasons why they're trying to give genetic testing to make sure that everybody in Israel is Jewish is because they're trying to roll out some kind of bioweapon, and one of the reasons they want to get this deal of the century seal off is basically to get the US's implicit stamp of approval. So, you want to get rid of all those pesky Palestinians? Yeah, go ahead. No, these people are both, they're dangerous for their respective countries and the rest of the world.
Well, Israel is working on bioweapons. They had a whole program together with South Africa, along with the nuclear program they shared with South Africa during the apartheid era. The downside of Israel trying to get rid of its Arabs through bioweapons is that the Sephardic Jews, which includes this tiny minority of indigenous Palestinian Jews, are genetically identical to the other Palestinians. So, on the other hand, the European Jews in Israel, the invaders, occupiers, and genocide perpetrators who crossed the oceans to destroy the Palestinians, probably don't care much about those Ashkenazi Jews. They already murdered hundreds and hundreds of children of Moroccan, Iraqi, and other Arab Jews in radiation experiments. So maybe they're happy to kill off all of the Semites. I talk about anti-Semitic. The European Jews have gone to Palestine to kill off all the Semites, whether Arab Jews or Arab Muslims or Arab Christians. I mean, those are the real racists. No wonder Nazism and Zionism are 2 sides of the same coin, quite literally, if you look at that coin. So it's pretty sad. The Palestinians, of course, are rejecting this so-called peace plan as planned. Obviously, nobody thought that they would ever accept it. And so that leads to the supposition that maybe this was designed to really piss off the Palestinians so that they will do things that will then give Bibi Netanyahu the excuse to up the ante and accelerate the genocide.
Yep, very much so. I mean, they as soon as it looked like the protests were even starting, they were out there with their guns and they're, oh yeah, that guy, he was coming right for us. Oh, that 8-month-old baby, yeah, it was coming right for us. It's really so disgusting and predictable how they do this again and again and again and get away with it every single time. And the fact that they aren't even satisfied with this status quo, they need to take more. That's what's so just disgusting about this whole situation, and that there were other countries standing there in the same room. I mean, Egypt and, well, never mind, we had that on another slide.
Let's start moving through these slides then, because that's an important one. But first, let's mention a very good article on the disaster in the making for the U.S. in the Middle East.
This was a great article.
Yeah, by the Saker. I really like the Saker. He comes on my radio show every now and then, and he points out that all of this is not boding well for the future of U.S. power in the region, which may be one reason that the adults in the room would like to get rid of Trump. They're hoping maybe they could control Pence a little better. But the gist of this article is that the Saker notices that supposedly, according to Trump, not one U.S. soldier was even injured in the Iranian retaliation for the murder of Soleimani. In fact, it was actually, 34. Now it's up to 50, just like the Iranians. The Iranians said like 80 or something were all evacuated to hospitals. And it turns out that the Iranians were closer to the mark than Trump, who was lying through his teeth as usual. So the point being that these Iranian missiles landed with high accuracy. The U.S. base suffered massive damage. And the U.S. may have air superiority if it goes to war with Iran, but Iran now shows that it actually has a better position for climbing the ladder of escalation. That is, that Iran has effective ground forces, it can accept losses, it has short and secure supply lines, and it is prepared for major defensive operations. So according to the Saker, Iran just Ladined the US. That is, Michael Ladin says, every couple of years, the US has to grab some crappy little country and throw it up against the wall just to show them that we mean business. Well, that's what Iran just did to the US, according to the Saker. And I thought that was an interesting perspective, not one that we see very many places in the mainstream.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a great article because it highlighted something that I think a lot of people have been suspecting for a while, which is that the US's much vaunted military superiority is largely a paper tiger. I mean, our weapon systems are falling apart. Some of them don't work at all. I mean, the F-35 is the one that everybody thinks of, but some of our ships, I mean, there was just an article today about how even our aircraft carriers, the defenses don't work properly. So everybody's saying that those aircraft carriers are sitting ducks in the Persian Gulf. Yeah, they are in more ways than we even thought. And even the smaller ships, like the literal combat ships, are just completely riddled with defects. And the F-35s can't fly in the rain. Our Patriot missiles can't hit the broadside of a barn. Yesterday, there was Esper was forced to admit that the reason that they hadn't brought in these Patriot missile batteries that they were going to bring in to defend the bases that had already been hit, because of course, why not close the doors once the horse is gone? But the reason he hadn't brought in the things was because they hadn't had permission from the Iraqi government. And it's because the Iraqi government told us to get lost almost a month ago. And we said, no, we're a force for good. Oh, we respect your sovereignty, but we're a force for good. By the way, don't call us an occupying force because we might have to sanction you for like hurting our feelings. And they're just not going to let them bring in the Patriots. So I asked, well, how are they going to do it? Are they going to stage an ISIS attack? And then while everybody's busy fighting ISIS, they can just wheel in those missiles?
Oh yeah, they're already bringing back ISIS.
Them as like, are they going to disguise them as like a shipment of dog food, and then just like, oh yeah, so many dogs we got to feed at our base, man. Look at all these dogs. And so I don't know how they're going to do it, but they got to get those missiles in somewhere because they've announced already that the missiles are coming in. So they have to like save face or just, I don't know, paint a box to look like missiles and say, yeah, look at those missiles over there. We can't get too close to them because they're so dangerous and scary. But that's what it's been like for all these years, just saying, oh yeah, you don't want to mess with us. We're really scary. We can kill all of you. But they only have fought such mismatched opponents. I mean, yeah, sure, you're fighting against Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East.
You're getting your butt kicked by
Yemen is not going to be able to put up much of a fight. Afghanistan? Yeah, exactly. And Afghanistan too. I mean, the Taliban controls more territory now than it has for a very long time. And so the U.S. against the poorest, most unorganized opponents is still getting destroyed. And so, yeah, if they square off against Iran, they're going to lose. Hello?
U.S. military power in the Middle East is getting less power.
Oh.
Okay, I think we had a little hiccup there on the internet connection. So Trump just shredded U.S. diplomatic and soft power at the moment that the U.S. military power is looking extremely fragile in the region. But the Zionists and the UAE, Qatar is the only one of those four that I wouldn't call 100% Zionist occupied. It's only about maybe 60% Zionist occupied. The US military base there is the most relevant occupation force. Those countries all had to make nice sounds about this insane deal of the century, which just shows who they really are. And of those countries, really the head of the snake is Saudi Arabia. In the next slide, we see that Saudi Arabia is going so far now in showing that its leaders are actually Zionists, that it's publishing mistranslations of the Qur'an in Hebrew, deliberately altered in order to support Israel's narrative supporting its genocide of Palestine. It leaves out the key verses about the Prophet Muhammad's Miraj journey from the Al-Aqsa Mosque site in the holy city of Jerusalem. So, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is the country that is supposedly the protector of the Haramain, the Medina and Mecca. And yet it's obviously 100% Zionist occupied. So the liberation of the Holy Land is not going to be just the Holy Land of Palestine. It's going to have to also be the Holy Land of Mecca and Medina.
Yeah, this was just one giant cringe. This, oh yeah, our new version of the Qur'an for the people who are really telling us what to do. And the fact that they were just standing there in the room as this Steel of the Century was being signed, and standing around and looking polite and like, you know, don't want to step on any toes, but that had to have been really, really embarrassing. If they had any shred of like patriotic feeling left or nationalistic feeling left, I mean, that's just, ugh, you're really being asked to sell out your people, and that can't feel good. I hope they have some shame about that.
I'm not even sure it is their people. Like the leaders of Saudi Arabia are allegedly descended from these bandit tribes that lived by murdering and plundering the caravans of pilgrims going to Mecca. And those bandit tribes, the Ibn Saud family at the head of that snake, were allegedly Donmei, Jewish satanic heretics. And Zionism is a satanic heresy that split off from Judaism after Shabtai Zvi and Jacob Frank twisted Judaism into a new form of Satanism. And that's basically where we are now with the state of Israel, which, you know, if there's really an antichrist coming to earth, I think that's pretty much what it has to be. And for the secular historical details, check out Ron Unz's new article, American Pravda, Mossad Assassinations. This is the other great long read from unz.com this week, alongside the Saker article we just mentioned. In this piece, Ron goes over, he starts out by saying, what's with this killing Soleimani and almost setting off World War III, and then threatening to kill the leaders of Russia and China in the same way. How did we get here? You know, this assassinating leaders of other countries has always been completely unthinkable, or largely unthinkable throughout most of modern history. And now we're doing it and about to blow up the planet. How did we get there? Well, here's how we got there. Look at who's really behind bringing back this, you know, getting into these gangster tactics of assassinating these leaders. It's the Zionists. Look at the body count they've left. It probably exceeds all the other assassinations by every other country in the world in the same period. They murder their own people, like Rabin, when they try to make peace. They murdered Arafat. They murdered Lord Moyne, the UN peace negotiator, Count Bernadotte. They tried to murder Harry Truman and Winston Churchill. They murdered JFK, his brother, Bobby Kennedy, and probably JFK Jr., although Ron's not so sure about that. They murdered James Forrestal, top U.S. foreign policy guy. They murdered William Colby, head of the CIA. They tried to murder John Gunther Dean, the ambassador, and John Gunther Dean explained that they murdered the president of Pakistan, Zia-ul-Haq, and on and on and on. I could go on all day about all of the assassinations these satanic antichrist Zionists have been committing all over the world, while in order to support their genocide of the Holy Land. But read the article and see what you think. Did you read this one, Helen?
I didn't finish it, but I'm familiar with the fact that is their modus operandi. I have that Rise and Kill first book, which I also need to read, as well as By Way of Deception. But yeah, I mean, if you've got one country that's not playing by any of the rules, and that country is just being allowed to do its dirty business, and it has been allowed to do its dirty business for decades with nobody standing in the way, then yeah, of course they're going to abuse that power, and they're going to keep doing it. And people talk about American exceptionalism, but hello, Israeli exceptionalism, nobody seems to want to even pronounce that phrase, maybe because they don't want to wake up dead, or not wake up, as the case may be. I mean, yeah, it's really the preemptive, or what was it, pre-traumatic stress disorder that Gilad Atzmon talks about is relevant here, because they're convinced that, oh, everybody's out to get us, everybody's out to get us. So that's how you get the people to approve of what their leaders are doing. I don't think that the Mossad actually believes that these people that they're murdering in their beds or on their boats or whatever are actually out to get them. I think they're just, they feel like they're doing what's good for the Jews, and whether or not it is actually good for the Jews, it's good for the Zionists, and they believe that's the same thing. Or do they? I mean, I don't think they actually believe that that's the same thing, but they want us to believe it, and they're going to start legally punishing it if we don't.
Yeah, it looks that way. And we might even get deplatformed just for discussing Ron Unz, who's Jewish, and his article, which ends up citing this. It really interesting sounding book that I haven't read. It's called The Jewish Threat by a guy named Ben Dursky, who was apparently high up in the American military strategic community. And according to Ron Unz, the top American generals over much of the 20th century were firmly convinced that, quote, this is a quote from Ron's article, they were firmly convinced that major elements of the organized Jewish community, national constitutional liberties, and gain mastery over the entire world. Well, that's a pretty audacious statement. And again, I'm quoting from Ron Unz, who is Jewish himself, so please don't deplatform us simply for recommending this amazing work in the American Pravda rubric over at unz.com. Check it out and think it over. And if you want to rebut it, come on my radio show and explain why Ron is wrong. That would be fine. So is Russia on the right side in this struggle? That's the next question. And Jeremy and Greg, our colleagues here at False Flag Weekly News, are not so sure about that. Greg sent us this interesting global research piece from, what is his name, Kurbiko, pointing out that when Putin went to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the death camp, the biggest diplomatic event in self-professed Jewish state's history, that Putin was simply demonstrating his abject fealty to the Zionist project. And according to the article, Russia is closer to Israel than to Iran. I don't think so. I think it's doing a balancing act, and that its push for a multipolar world actually makes it lean more towards Iran. But what do you think, Helen?
I would agree that it's doing a balancing act. I mean, I think that if Putin were to outwardly or explicitly reject Israel, then Israel would have to do something. You know, maybe Putin would wake up at the bottom of the sea or something like that. I don't think that Russia wants to antagonize Israel, but I also don't think that they're completely owned by Israel, as certain people seem to believe. I mean, if you've got everybody from every side attacking you and accusing you of being with the other side, you're actually probably doing something right, because nobody knows where you actually stand. Although it was interesting, I think True News had on Beryl Lazar, the chief rabbi of Russia, asking him about the quote unquote peace plan, the world's least peaceful peace plan, before it had been unveiled. And he had seen the plan before everybody else, I guess, or at least before the general public, and made some comment about how, yeah, it's really good for the Palestinians because it's going to teach them to like not be terrorists. And it's like, they don't do that. And the True News guy asked him, well, do they get a sovereign state? And the rabbi was like, no, but it's going to be great. You know, it's the best. The Israelis are going to love it. Well, that was never the question. So, but this is obviously, I mean, this is Russia's chief rabbi, so he's not going to be exactly rushing to embrace the Muslim world. No, I think Putin is relatively independent as far as these things go. He's trying to keep Russia above the fray and, you know, keep the economy strong, make sure that the U.S. doesn't make a big mess out of the world.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question. There's certainly a lot of organized Jewish Zionist power in Russia as well as in the U.S. And so the leaders of both countries have to deal with it. I think the way the U.S. has been dealing with it since 9/11 has been just becoming utter slaves of the most insane radical Zionists. Before that, it wasn't quite that bad. In Russia, I think it's not even as bad as it was pre 9/11 in the U.S. That's my evaluation anyway, but I know Greg doesn't agree. Maybe I'll get Greg on the show to talk with him. Well, let's move on to the continuing fallout from the Soleimani assassination. Biggest censorship campaign in history. I published this piece over at unz.com on comparing Soleimani to Che Guevara and pointing out that that's the reason why the social media, especially the Facebook social media, including Instagram, has basically banned the millions and millions of people who were mourning the death of the great General Soleimani, and thereby creating what may be the biggest censorship campaign in history. In the next slide, we have the Orinoco Tribune's article about this ban on millions and millions and millions of people expressing their thoughts about Trump's murder of the great Iranian general. And then the next slide is the American Herald Tribune article along the same line. So, Helen, how did the American civil liberties community miss the fact that we just saw what might be the biggest censorship campaign in the history of the world? Literally millions and millions and millions of people deprived of their right to express themselves.
Yeah, one thing, it wasn't even just a pro-Soleimani posts that were censored. It was everything that didn't demonize him, which puts him in an interesting category, because before, the only people who you would get censored for not demonizing were if you mentioned Alex Jones, Louis Farrakhan, and there were a couple more. There's like a group of 5 that are like unpersoned by Facebook. Like you can't even just mention
the gang of 5.
Yeah,
Gang of 5.
A very ideologically disparate little group, but whatever. And getting back to this though, they removed any people from multiple countries who had just merely put out factual statements. Some of them just quoting U.S. media who had praised him for combating ISIS, and then suddenly turned around and painted him as the biggest demon ever. I like the comparison to Che Guevara because he has really attained that iconic status. I mean, he was so popular in Iran, obviously, 81% approval rate. None of our politicians could ever dream of such a thing. If one of our politicians died, millions would come into the streets to celebrate, not to mourn. So we don't even understand how this phenomenon works. And yeah, it's terrifying because they realize that they've just united the entire region against us. This facade of, oh yes, we're working with the Iraqis to get these missiles in, or to get these people dead, or to do whatever needs to be done. There's no longer any illusion of working with. I mean, the millions of Iraqis were in the street, if not millions, at least close to 1 million were in the street just last week demonstrating against the US occupation. And it has become an occupation again. So the only thing remains to be seen is, are they going to destroy Iraq a 3rd time? Or are they going to run away with their tail between their legs? I really hope it's the latter, but the US isn't very good at admitting defeat.
Well, I think they're going to have to this time. The fallout from this assassination is going to be with us for a very long time. And we just heard that the retaliation from Iran was much more powerful than we realized at the time, or than the mainstream told us at the time. And who knows how many more strikes are going to come from people who are getting vengeance for the murder of Soleimani, whether or not they're even part of any Iranian chain of command. A great many of them probably won't be. And one example of a possible revenge act happened over Afghanistan this week. We got a report that the top US CIA head of such operations for the Middle East, Michael D'Andrea, was killed in a shoot down of a mobile CIA command plane over Afghanistan. Now, this is from anonymous sources in the national security communities of the U.S. and Russia. It's in Veterans Today, and I know, Helen, you're not convinced that everything that we print in Veterans Today is always accurate. So, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I was a little skeptical about this one because, I mean, Gordon Duff's anonymous national security sources are not exactly trustworthy. It's something that I would like to be true. I mean, you want to think the universe is a just place, and this guy goes and murders Soleimani, and he gets in turn killed in whatever way. But I mean, there's no proof. It remains to be seen. I would like him to come out and wave to everybody on Instagram or something, and then maybe we can put this to bed. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah, so we'll bracket that one, and we'll wait and see if any confirmation comes in. Moving on to more substantial and certain victories by the axis of resistance, we have the Jerusalem Post admitting that the new government in Lebanon is now 100% Hezbollah allied, rather than only 80% Hezbollah allied as before. So the color revolution effort to try to dislodge Hezbollah in Lebanon totally backfired. So Hezbollah's in charge in Lebanon. And then check out Yemen. The Houthis are on the march. They're firing at Aramco again. And in the next slide, we see that they just made a huge advance, taking a couple of very strategic spots. They're about to take back everything that they lost and be back in total control. So the axis of resistance is responding to the Soleimani assassination by going from victory to victory.
Yeah, that Lebanon article was actually rather disturbing. It was Jerusalem Post, and they're basically saying, okay, well, now that Hezbollah controls all of Lebanon, next time, because you know they won a rematch ever since they had to leave with their tail between their legs in 2006, they've desperately rematched. And now they're like, okay, well, now that Hezbollah controls everything, we're not going to make any distinctions between like civilians and combatants. We're just going to lay waste to the whole damn place. And they're really looking to do that. I mean, they've been drilling military, what's the word? Military scenarios or simulations, that's the word. Simulations with Lebanon for the last several years, probably, at least the last year, and they're really itching to get back in there. And so now that Hezbollah is running things, then they want a rematch.
Well, some of them may want a rematch. Maybe others, the ones who actually understand the ramifications, not so much. Hezbollah has literally hundreds of times more rockets and better rockets now than they had then, and they were able to beat Israel then. So be careful what you wish for.
That's
Netanyahu.
logical thinking. That's logical thinking. They don't do that in Netanyahu's cabinet. It's all about, we have to always be fighting the enemy, or else, somebody's going to turn on us, and can't have that.
Yeah, boy, it's so pathetic, because they actually could get their Jewish state, and they could get, their little capital in Jerusalem, although they can't blow up the Aqsa Mosque. The Israelis could easily have peace, in far more than they deserve, if they were simply willing to be normal, rational human beings. But there's something wrong with those people. Moving on to the coronavirus. This was a big scare story this week. We're told the coronavirus is about to eat planet Earth. And it went viral, and the conspiracy theories went viral. So we had, of course, the debunkings of the conspiracy theories also going viral. And here was one at foreignpolicy.com pointing out that, let's see, as of midweek, there were 6,000 confirmed cases, 132 deaths. This virus shares similarities to MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and also SARS, a severe acute respiratory syndrome. And this particular article, first it debunks some, idiotic American propaganda claim that this virus was weaponized in a military lab in Wuhan. And then it debunks global research, which is more telling us that this is more likely an American biowar strike. And well, Helen, I'm a little suspicious of this, actually, because let's look in the next slide. Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary of the United States, tells us that this wonderful coronavirus is going to hurt the Chinese economy and bring back jobs to the U.S. It's going to make America great again. That's a weird way to respond to a threatening global pandemic, isn't it? What do you think?
Yeah, he said the thing you're not supposed to say out loud. Bad Wilbur. But yeah, no, obviously if all these media outlets have space to run, conspiracy theory bad articles, then the pandemic can't be that bad, because otherwise they'd be writing about, oh yeah, everybody's dying and everybody's panicking and stampeding, rush for food. No, because it's not actually killing that many people, and it's completely asymptomatic apparently for the first 2 weeks you have it, and so they have to say, oh well, everybody's getting it without even knowing it, and it's all going to manifest in 2 weeks. So it's really scary, because you'll have it and you'll spread it and you won't even know. So they have to come up with these narratives that paint it as this sort of lurking, like, demonic presence. I think the Chinese might have been Xi himself said that it's a demon and we can't hide the demon. But I don't know. I mean, that might have been a deliberate mistranslation to try to get everybody in the West riled up. But yeah, it's definitely being used to monger fear, as they are wont to do. I mean, I just gave a presentation the week before this whole thing broke out, talking about how if you want to unite the world in some direction, you have to come up with either a planet-wide catastrophe of, let's see, climate change is not really uniting. People are too much disagreement about that. Alien invasion, well, they're laying the groundwork for that with these disclosures like you were talking about before. Or pandemic. Pandemic seems to be the way to go. They've had a great plan for this since 2010. The Rockefeller Foundation came up with this idea. You can look it up online. It's published. It's there. It's unfolding exactly according to plan, called Lockstep. And in Lockstep, the pandemic requires police state imposition around the globe. China does better than everybody else because they have that authoritarian state thing going, and that's really cool. We should all be more like China. And in the end, we all do end up being more like China. There's a little bit of discontent here and there, but on the whole, the results are good, except in the third world. But we can't trust those third world people. I mean, they're not like us. So yeah, it's really disgusting how they plan these things out there. They admit them, and we're going to get to that in a later slide, that they did even more than in 2010.
Well, yeah, let's look at the next slide. The US health experts hosted a fictional coronavirus pandemic tabletop exercise simulation 3 months before the outbreak. Again, the drill seemingly goes live. Where have we seen that before?
How many times have we not seen that before? I mean, you lose count eventually, because, and this apparently, what I don't think says this in this article, but I read that Johnson & Johnson, the pharmaceutical company, was a participant in this drill, and they're working on, of course, a vaccine for the novel coronavirus. It's like, how did they know? They must be psychic. And it's just, you can either believe in coincidence theory upon coincidence theory, or you can think, this might be proceeding just according to plan. But yeah, they had to even put a statement on their website, this group that did the simulation, to say, oh, well, we had nothing to do with this. And we know we said in the simulation that 65 million people are going to die, but it's not like 65 million people are definitely going to die. It could be 64. Ooh, no, they didn't say that, but that's the idea. You have to lay out the simulation and then put a really scary bit on the end so that everybody knows that it's going to be, oh, it might not be killing people now, but it's going to be killing people later. So you better call for more security, call for more police state, call for temperature checks just to leave your house. And yeah, I mean, if everything does go according to this Rockefeller Foundation plan, we're screwed. But hopefully, I know hoping for the masses to rise up against their oppressors is not really a logical or realistic hope. But I mean, this stuff is pretty scary. Not the virus, the people weaponizing the virus.
Yeah, I mean, Wilbur Ross cheering and saying, "Hey, this is great. This is going to make America great again." And this, this exercise right before, I mean, you'd have to be a real coincidence theorist, I think, not to be spreading wacky coronavirus conspiracy theories. And that's why Facebook and Twitter have to scramble to stop the wacky conspiracy theories from spreading, because they're going viral. So once again, social media censorship has gone haywire. It's like, the Soleimani thing, the coronavirus thing, they have more and more excuses to try to stop people from expressing themselves honestly on social media.
I just can't believe they used the word wacky in a headline about this supposedly deadly killer virus that's going to kill every last one of us. But they have time to stop and talk about wacky coronavirus conspiracy theories. And they don't say what any of those are. I mean, they say, I think they have one thing about the US government patenting the virus, which is true. The US government has patented a version of coronavirus, and I think a couple of pharmaceutical companies have too. That in and of itself is not necessarily...
That's wacky.
That's wacky. It's not necessarily nefarious in and of itself, because supposedly they're using it to make vaccines for other things. But combined with all the other things, yeah, it's a little sketchy, and it might make you want to look into the matter more, which is exactly what they don't want you to do. And then, yeah, the only other wacky conspiracy theory they mentioned, which isn't a conspiracy theory at all, they said that something about oregano curing the virus. Now, oregano is an antibacterial herb, but it's not a conspiracy that someone might say that it cures a virus. It probably doesn't. I mean, it's antibacterial, a virus is a virus, but that's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, that's the meaning of the word does not even... So they've obviously got a whole bushel of conspiracy theories they don't feel comfortable sharing with us, which means they're probably true. So
yeah, the anti-conspiracy theory propaganda is so stupid that it almost seems like it's part of a conspiracy to make every intelligent person into a conspiracy theorist. Any case, if that's the conspiracy, it's working really well. But they're conspiracy theories and conspiracy theories, and we have to watch out for the Alex Jones style fear porn of, oh my God, the world's going to end. The coronavirus is going to get us. We're going to be locked up in the basement of Walmart. And the Off Guardian had a good antidote to that.
Yeah, I like this
with this article pointing out that, I mean, it's really not that bad this far. It's like the death rate is nothing compared to just the normal flu.
Yep, I like this article because it said what I was saying earlier, as far as like the death rate is rather low. The symptoms are all of these scary viruses, like Zika was the last one. Zika was like a mild flu that supposedly caused, if you were pregnant, it was supposed to be bad because your baby would be born with a tiny head. Now, that didn't really end up happening except in a few cases, which were widely publicized, and everyone was, oh, if you're pregnant, you can't go to these places but that was the best they could come up with. And all of these diseases are just like, oh, it's like the flu, except scarier. Okay, so the flu kills quite a few people every year, supposedly. These are not killing as many people. I don't know. I mean, supposedly now they have a test to come up with the actual virus. China does that. It only takes 15 minutes. We know if you have the virus or not. So that should clamp down on some of the irresponsible speculation, but of course it won't, because that would require all the other countries that are using it to enact their own little police state fantasies to come up with this test and start using it on people. But why do that when you can just say, hey, that guy over there, you're a troublemaker. Hey, have you been coughing? I thought I heard you cough. Do you have a runny nose? Oh, you have a fever. Better lock you up. And then the guy's never seen again. I mean, I'm not going to say they actually are pulling stuff like that. I'm not Alex Jones over here. But like I said, the virus itself is not to be feared. It's the people talking about the virus and saying, fear this. Those are the ones you should be afraid of.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic that they try to convince the world that it's us conspiracy theorists who are spreading fear everywhere. We're paranoid. We're spreading paranoia, when actually it's the mainstream that is grossly exaggerating all of these supposed threats to try to keep everybody in a state of constant panic. And some have even argued that the climate change threat might be weaponized and exaggerated in order to terrorize people into following some sort of nefarious agenda. Who would say something like that? Oh, Helen Bienisky. Helen, this is a really interesting article. So, when they tell us that people who question certain things about the climate change orthodoxy are deniers who must be silenced and must be censored and must be deplatformed, it kind of makes me think, maybe I'd better look at this again, because maybe, if they have to terrorize us and silence us and censor us, maybe the arguments against the consensus climate change model are stronger than I realized. And you make this point very well in this article, but when they start using hysteria and mass censorship to try to promote a particular point of view, it makes you wonder what the other points of view have that makes them so dangerous that they have to be silenced.
Yeah, Germany has this thing where every year they get together a panel of a handful of linguists and a journalist, and they ask for votes from the populace, but they don't really pay attention to them. And they say, what word should we just get rid of? A word that's been used too much, a word that's been used against democracy, a word that's been used badly all this year. And so they decided this year it was climate hysteria would be the term.
It's like the memory hole a particular word every year.
Memory hole climate hysteria, because they think, those people who are talking about that, well, they're hurting the cause of fighting climate change. Although they're bad people, climate deniers. The climate deniers are evil and wrong. And of course, there's this simultaneous campaign by the George Soros-funded Avaz online activism group that tries to get to YouTube to remove climate change denier videos, which include people who don't deny climate change at all, but merely suggest that there are other factors involved, and that maybe, yeah, sure, it's man-made, but not man-made in the sense that you might think, and et cetera, et cetera. So people with alternative views on climate change who are not denying it, those people are bad, have to be removed. And yeah, so saying that it's completely off limits to question climate change is going to get a whole lot of people who maybe weren't paying attention to the issue before, or just kind of tacitly accepted it without paying too much attention, think, they don't really make this big fuss over like flat earth or other really stupid like conspiracy theories that have nothing to them, because those are harmless. So there's got to be something here. And so it's like, if they don't realize that they're doing this, then they're really stupid. But I don't know. I mean, it seems like they're just trying to cause chaos as far as like people being able to coherently express themselves. If you got to half the left yelling at the other half of the left saying, you're a denier of this or that. Once the word denier comes out, all bets are off. I'm sorry. You've lost the argument once you roll out the word denier. Hands down,
maybe we should ban that
all
word.
Fronts, including the ones you're not allowed to talk about.
Maybe we should get the authorities.
No, that was the other thing. That was the other thing, is that the German authorities, there were several other suggestions that people had made, most of which had to do with the other side. So there's this kids song that they made that was really offensive to older Germans, where they use the phrase Umweltsau, which is environmental sow. It's apparently an insult to climate change disbelieving old people. Like twice as many people voted for that as for Klimahysterie, which is climate hysteria. I'm probably butchering those words. I don't speak German, sorry. But, and they ignored those votes. No, that word didn't qualify. Qualifications, what were those? And yeah, so it's very telling. They only value democracy in as much as it serves their aims.
Well, I think what we're seeing with this ban this word this year, ban that word that year campaign is what they're doing is actually giving us a little glimpse of what's going on behind the scenes, which is that the search engines, Google in particular, are obviously banning, censoring, downgrading various words and search terms. And I think the term false flag has probably been victimized in this regard, because years ago, I used to use false flag, for instance, as a Twitter hashtag or as a search term, and it brought me all kinds of results. Everybody was interested in false flags, and they still are. But now the surest way to make sure that something I post or tweet is totally buried and nobody sees it is to use the term false flag as the hashtag or search term. False Flag Weekly News has undoubtedly suffered from this as well, but that doesn't mean that people don't understand false flags better and better every year. Over in Pakistan, it's totally mainstream. Everybody in Pakistan now knows that India's so-called Muslim terrorism is almost 100% false flag. And here we have a mainstream book with a big breakout happening over in Pakistan. Speaking of the false flag world that we're living in, how about this revelation that the white supremacist terror group, what's that terror group called, Helen? What was the name of this group?
The Base, the English version of Al Qaeda. Yeah,
so here's the founder of the Base, and he's a gladio provocateur. Obviously, he's a CIA agent. That you have to read halfway through the Guardian article to figure that out. But obviously, this is a false flag group. It's called, a honeypot. They're trying to suck everybody in who is vaguely nationalist or revolutionary or wants to join a militia. And this CIA agent becomes their leader. I mean, this is Emmanuel Goldstein.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's not surprising to me at all that this guy is an agent. I'm just more surprised that the Guardian reported on it, because usually they try to cover this stuff up. The white supremacists, scary white supremacists, are their bread and butter. If they didn't have that, they wouldn't be able to report on U.S. news at all. I mean, it's all about the white supremacist threat. Oh, they're killing us. They're literally killing us. That guy is not killing anybody. That guy is getting people arrested.
Yeah, it's a great article, but it's good when the Guardian actually prints a little bit of truth. Their 9/11 truth stuff from years and years ago was quite good, actually. Michael Meacher, one of the highest-ranking British politicians, the former environmental minister, close friend of Jeremy Corbyn, wrote great 9/11 truth stuff for the Guardian years ago. So every now and then, some truth does sneak into the Guardian. But let's move on though to a topic that it's another controversial and somewhat confusing topic, and that is Sandy Hook. What was interesting to me about the reports on Wolfgang Halbig's arrest for spreading personal information about Lenny Posner and Noah Posner, and we've heard those names before in relation to the anti-Jim Fetzer lawsuit, the anti-Alex Jones lawsuit. Anyway, Wolfgang Halbig has now been arrested, and the New York Post headline here, Sandy Hook conspiracy theorist. Well, that's not very fair and balanced, but let's look at the New York Times headline. Next slide. This is unbelievable. A notorious Sandy Hook tormentor. Wait a minute. I thought the New York Times prided itself on its fairness and objectivity and just the facts. Look at this. The New York Times has descended to the level of the National Enquirer, if not lower.
No, this was really, I mean, you don't expect this from the New York Times. You expect some bias, yes, especially in subjects like this. But I mean, a New York Post is supposed to be the tabloid. This is just ridiculous. I mean, for one thing, I didn't realize that us giving the cops somebody's personal information was a felony. I thought that was like kind of what they do. And they said that he gave the personal information to like 5 police departments or something like that. I didn't realize that was a felony. Since that's a weird felony.
So if you're investigating a crime and you're trying to help the police solve a crime and you provide that kind of information, you'll get arrested? That's bizarre. That's like if, for instance, if some credit card company or one of these companies that assess your credit rating, they have your personal information like social security number. And if they have a reason to think that somebody's committing a crime and they give that to the police, does that mean that the head of that company is going to be imprisoned? That's just bizarre.
Apparently only when they have to find a reason to lock up a conspiracy theorist. I mean, they just paint him as the biggest nut job there. And well, if he's making thousands of phone calls to anybody, obviously that comes across as rather unhinged, but they just eliminate all context, anything that might have possibly tempered this portrayal. I mean, there's no way that anybody in the planet is as crazy as they're painting this guy out to be.
Yeah,
I mean, look at those pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think that, I was a Wolfgang Halbig skeptic. I always argued with James Tracy and Jim Fetzer that, I'm not so sure about this Halbig guy. I think his credentials may be a little inflated, and so and some of the stuff he said, in the whole rabbit hole he's going down, I'm not so sure about this guy. And so I had this argument for years, but now, I mean, looking at what the New York Times is doing to him, and if they have to do that, maybe he's really onto something. It's just like your article about the climate hysteria thing. If they have to censor it in such a ham-fisted way, it really makes you wonder.
Yeah, unless they are finally realizing that when they attack something, people glom onto it. So maybe now it's a trap, and they're trying to get people to glom onto Wolfgang Halbig because he really is completely crazy.
Oh man, they got me. Really, they got me.
Territorial way of thinking. I'm a bad person. I hope I didn't give any personal information to anybody, or I might have a knock at my door soon.
Well, they tricked me into thinking that Wolfgang Halbig maybe is onto something. Anyway, let's move on to the Orwellianism and psychopathy rubric here, one of our favorite rubrics. There's an Orwellian total video surveillance nightmare approaching, according to The Intercept. The rise of smart camera networks. All the cameras watching everybody are going to all get smart and start conspiring amongst each other. This sounds like a conspiracy theory. And then they'll follow you everywhere you go and know everything about you and watch every move that you make, which is pretty much what they're almost already doing. And the main purpose, ostensibly, is to know what you want to buy so they can bombard you with commercials. This is right out of Philip K. Dick novels from the 1960s that envisioned little robot insects buzzing and landing on your windshield and singing these jingles to make you buy things. It's worse than that now. I mean, Philip K. Dick must be rolling over in his grave.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about 1984 and Brave New World all the time, but I mean, the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, all these books that Philip K. Dick wrote are coming to at the same rate. Minority Report, the film, I forget the name of the story it's based on, but it's not to make you buy things. It's for surveillance government purposes. The making you buy things is only to cover. Obviously, when they have Big Brother and Big Tech working hand in hand, one gets to be the cover for the other. One gets to be the conduit by which the other can surpass the Constitution or circumvent the Constitution, rather. I cannot talk today. I apologize. But the cameras are going to be smart, and they're going to have their smart drones with them. So if you step out of line, something just, comes out of its hive and shoots you. I mean, the Pentagon has been testing its little self-aware drone swarms. I mean, nothing good can come of self-aware drone swarms. There was a whole Black Mirror episode about that. Although those weren't self-aware. They could be hacked and controlled, and then they were used to kill people. So they always end up killing people. The smart technology always ends in tragedy.
Well, but Helen, if all of these kinds of Orwellian control systems end up in the hands of good people, then everybody will be totally surveilled and unable to do anything bad ever, and will be living in paradise. The only problem with that theory is that the people who climb to the tops of power hierarchies and thereby get control of the Orwellian apparatus tend to be, as George Orwell noticed in 1984, total psychopaths. So psychopathy and Orwellianism are related, and our psychopathy rubric today is, hey, Eddie Gallagher. He's making thinly veiled death threats to the people who testified against his murdering prisoners and being a general total psycho killer in court. And Trump, of course, pardoned him, another psychopath. So the psychopaths rule. And giving them this kind of technology to watch everything everybody does and to whack you if you get out of line, it's probably not a real good idea.
Well, it's, obviously they have a head start, because the normal person doesn't wake up every day thinking, gee, how can I exert power over others? How can I control others? How can I exert my will over large groups of unwilling people? Like, that's not a normal thought for people to have. So psychopaths are thinking that, and they have a big head start on the rest of us because we're always on the defensive, and they're always, they take the initiative.
I just came across a great passage in Tolstoy's War and Peace describing Napoleon. It's like right in the middle of the book when Napoleon's about to invade Russia. Smart move there. But the Tolstoy's gets inside the psychology of Napoleon, and he's just like totally, it's about his will, imposing his will on the world. That's all he is. And that's pretty much how it works. People like that rise to that kind of position, and we're empowering them by letting them have this kind of technology. Anyway, let's move on to the sad news of the week, which was Kobe Bryant going down in a helicopter, and even sadder, having conspiracy theorists exploiting Kobe's death. It's tragic. The conspiracy theories are even more tragic, and the most tragic of all is the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that because the helicopter he went down in had a Jewish name, that it was a Jewish conspiracy. Here at False Flag Weekly News, we pride ourselves on debunking anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and this one, at least, is definitely not true.
Yeah, what was he? Oh, well, I've been in helicopters before, and they don't work like that. And well, it might have been foggy, but it wasn't that foggy. And it's like, dude, you weren't there. You have no idea what happened. That doesn't make any sense. This kind of thing gives conspiracy theorists a bad name.
Okay, well, we're done giving conspiracy theorists a good name for another week. So thank you to our great audience and our supporters who help us out over at Fundraiser. We couldn't do that without you. Thank you so much. Helen Bajniski, I love your work. Great essay for RT this week and on an ongoing basis. Look forward to having you back again soon. And so, again, thanks, everybody. Have a great Super Bowl weekend. See you next week.
Have a good one.